We're continuing our partnership with Learn Liberty today, and joining me is the president and CEO of the Thurgood Marshall Scholarship Fund, the only national organization representing the nearly 300,000 students attending America's 47 historically black colleges. Johnny C. Taylor, welcome to the Rubin Report.
So glad to be here.
I got to tell you, man, and I just did tell you, but now I'll repeat it since the cameras are on. We've been doing this thing with Learn Liberty for a little over a year or so, yes. And they've sent us some great authors and professors and thinkers. I've never requested anyone. You, sir, are the first person I requested because I saw you speak a couple months back at a conference for academics, had to do a lot about free speech and liberty and all sorts of things. And you gave the keynote address on the final night, and I thought this guy is possibly the most passionate speaker I've ever seen in my life.
Thank you.
Where does that passion come from?
Well,
let's start there. Before we even talk about what you do, just the passion that you had, I was just like, I got to get that guy on the show.
See, it's interesting. I spent my career in the entertainment space, the media space, Paramount Pictures, Spelling Entertainment, Blockbuster Entertainment. So all of my life was doing that kind of stuff, making money, let's be honest, right? But I always had this yearning for the community and how higher education could play into sort of fixing what was going on in my community. And I say the community, I mean all of Americans, but particularly African Americans. And there were so many conversations that didn't occur, weren't allowed to occur. And so I took this new role at the Thurgood Marshall College Fund, representing black colleges. I didn't attend a black college. I often say I'm a beneficiary of it because so many of my teachers and doctors and lawyers did, but I didn't. My parents didn't attend a black college. But I thought this was such an opportunity to come in and really begin to influence how young people, our future leaders, how they think about the world, and then to challenge them. My legal education, by definition, sort of taught me to challenge the status quo, to be able to argue both sides, or in some instances, three sides of any argument. And so that's where it came from. I don't sleep at night sometimes thinking about where America is headed. And that's where the passion comes from. I'm genuinely concerned about where we're going.
Yeah, I feel that too, and we kind of hit that a little bit before. Now we got to do it all over right now. Tell me a little bit more about your resume before we get to what you've been doing these last couple of years, because you just mentioned some of that stuff. I mean, you've got a pretty prime, your LinkedIn's got to be pretty fat. I mean, that thing lasts on what, like 8 pages or something?
That's right, God is good.
Yeah. But tell me a little bit about that, because I think it does form sort of how you end up sitting across from me here.
Yeah, so I began my career, well, let me back up. I did undergraduate work at the University of Miami. I'm born and raised in Florida, so I'm the U. I got to give my shout out to my school. In any event, I finished school, went to law school in Iowa at Drake University. I came back to South Florida to practice at a big law firm. Janet Reno was the first female partner. So I'm dating myself, it takes you way back. And then began my practice. Sat on a plane one day, met I did not know at the time, a billionaire, Wayne Huizenga, who had this small little business called Blockbuster that he was building. I went in as the third lawyer on staff, and literally we went through this huge acquisition spree. And you remember, Blockbuster was on every corner, it was the biggest thing. So did that, Viacom bought us. So I've spent my time as a lawyer, as an HR executive, and then ultimately, once Viacom bought us and worked for Sumner at Viacom, Sumner Redstone, and then my last corporate gig was running a business, a subsidiary for Barry Diller in New York. So I literally have had all of the back office functions and then ran frontline operator running a business for Barry, and then came to TMCF in 2010 as the CEO.
So you've been doing this for now about 7 years, and you're actually about to shift on to something else, which we'll get to a little later.
Yes.
But tell me a little bit about what the Scholarship Fund actually does. What is the purpose? Because I know a certain amount of people, because I know a lot of your thoughts on the diversity memo and all that stuff. It almost sounds counter to what the Thurgood Marshall Scholarship Fund might do.
Right. So the College Fund was actually created, by the way, we were created as the Scholarship Fund, Thurgood Marshall Scholarship Fund. About a decade ago, we changed the name to broaden the remit to the College Fund. So it's Thurgood Marshall College Fund. And we really only do 4 things. Scholarships. We provide scholarships for the absolutely most talented students. So this is not sort of a social services feel good for kids who didn't get a shot K through 12. These are the brightest kids who frankly just have money problems they need. So scholarships that are need and merit based. Then capacity building. we've talked with our schools a lot about, there was a time when HBCUs, captive market, if you were black and you wanted to go to college, you attended a black college. Well, everything changed. Be careful what you pray for. We asked for diversity, we got it. We asked for integration, we got it. And so now black students have options. And so black colleges, the historically black colleges, have got to step up. So the second thing is to build their capacity to be attractive. The third thing that we do is governmental affairs. I mean, a lot of advocacy and policy work to make sure that we're not making emotional decisions. We want to do what is good for our communities and what's good for this country. Those are really the three things that we focus on as a fund, and that's the work that we do.
Yeah.
And the thing that most of the folks frankly don't realize is historically black colleges are not EBCUs. They're not exclusively black colleges. In fact, currently four of our member schools are majority white.
Really?
Majority white. So they are still historically black colleges because the H is historically black, not necessarily currently black.
Yeah.
So West Virginia State and Bluefield State College, both in West Virginia, Lincoln University in Missouri, Kentucky State. These are schools that, while are actually HBCUs, have more white students than black students. And those are some of the things that people don't understand. This is not about race per se.
Yeah. How much battling is there over what it means to be historically black versus currently diverse? Because I would imagine you've got, ideas and academics and administrators who are probably pretty entrenched in keeping things, just looking at it by numbers, not necessarily diversity of thought.
That's
and
right.
all that. So you must be dealing with that constantly.
Oh, you have no idea. You have no
I probably have a little bit of an idea.
Let me tell you, it gets ugly. And it's interesting because I'm surprised, and I know we'll talk about some of this, but I'm surprised at the number. You'd like to think millennials. We think millennials and we group them in and they're open and they're diverse and they're, well, I was surprised. We've had some students, really, not faculty, not alumni, but students, 18 and 19-year-olds, take great issue with the fact that the institutions are more diverse than they were. They wanted to come to an all-black institution, and when we get there and realize that we have international students and white students and Hispanic students, they really push back. So that's been a real surprise to me.
Yeah. How do you break through that?
Well, you continue. First of all, you explain to them that HBCU is not EBCU. Yeah. You start with that. You also then explain. I find myself oftentimes when I'm talking to them saying, let me just put yourself in this situation. So just recently, one of our campuses, a group of students were really upset because, in fact, it was all over the national news. Students came on the campus of Howard University wearing the Make America Great Again t-shirts and caps, right? And I said, now, one of the student leaders, I pulled to the side, I said, I want you just for a second to ask me, how do you think this would play out? Group of black students, right after Obama's elected, go visit Liberty University's campus. They have on the wonderful Obama t-shirts where they're proud of this new president, and they were literally run off of campus. They were threatened. They were harassed. How do you think that will go over? And so what I find myself doing is just literally put yourself in that situation and tell me why this is that different. And then you get that pause, that moment. By the way, that's what motivates me to do my work, because that's the way you influence the narrative and how these young people think. You have to just stop and say, I get how you feel right now emotionally about this, but for just a second, let's flip the script and tell me how this works. And you're smart, you're bright.
Yeah.
Tell me how this works out. That's really part of what motivates me to do the work.
Yeah, and that's what we need more of, right? I mean,
yes.
Because everybody seems hysterical over emotional stuff.
That's
like
right.
like I can understand it. If I was black and I wanted to go to a historically black college and I got there and I thought it was going to be 80% black and I got there and I was like, wait a minute, I'm actually still a minority here. The emotional part I can understand of being like, this doesn't feel right to me. But then when you hear that and you go, well, things actually are changing, integration is changing. This is all good. This is the purpose, right? This is the purpose of freedom.
We prayed for, right? I often say, be careful what you pray for. This is exactly what we said we wanted, is the opportunity to choose. Kind of. That's what I can tell you. That's what my great grandparents wanted. That's what in fact, Thurgood Marshall himself. Folks don't realize this. Thurgood Marshall didn't choose to go to Howard University Law School. Thurgood Marshall, fact of the matter is, applied to the University of Maryland, was denied admission to that law school, and went to Howard because it was the college for black students, law schools for black students. And so you just have to think about it. He then subsequently brought lawsuits to actually stop that very thing. Again, this wasn't anti-HBCU, The message was, I want to be able to choose, irrespective of my skin color, where I go to school. So all of us should have predicted that we would be right where we are today.
Yeah.
And what I find is the young folks just don't understand the history. And then the older people refuse to tell the honest history.
So what's going on there? Because I don't there is so much nonsense. The media is so complicit in this.
Yes.
I don't, and identity politics has become so rooted in everything that I don't blame the young people who are misguided. Yeah, I want to get through to them and all that. It's the other people that you're talking about, the older people and the academics that are afraid to speak. What happened there? Did you see it change?
I did. I saw it, and where? When I was in school, you were encouraged to be a little bit of a provocateur. Always respectfully. There was no one wanted you to go out and hurt someone's feelings. But we were encouraged in law school, for example, to look at things from all different sorts of perspectives. I was given a case once where you'd have to represent the plaintiff and then turn around and go against that plaintiff, defend them. So we've just lost that in education now. And I got to tell you, more and more I'm talking to students who say, I feel a certain way, but I know that if I either uttered my thoughts, even in a question format in the classroom, I'd be attacked by my professor. It would impact my participation in class grade, that portion of my grade. Also, and more importantly,
what do you say to kids when they say that?
Perhaps you're at the wrong school. I said, you got to vote with your feet. College is not it's supposed to be a time to explore and to grow. If you already knew what you needed to know to sort of live in life and be successful, then you don't need to spend 5 or 6 years and hundreds of thousands of dollars. If you are the same person that you walked in the door at the end of your freshman year, then you were cheated.
Yeah.
And I tell them, you should challenge the institution to give you a better education. And sometimes the way you get better is to have to confront ideas that you don't necessarily embrace. You don't understand them. One situation that sort of comes up, and I think it helps my students a lot understand where I come from. I said, listen, I was an employment lawyer early in my career. And at that time, there was a big question, for example, around whether or not gay, lesbian, sexual orientation was covered under Title VII. Okay? Big question. Gender and sex was clear. If you were being discriminated against on the basis of something else, on sort of sexual orientation, that wasn't covered. I actually brought those cases and made those arguments. I defended them, that it was not the intent of the Congress and this was ridiculous, etc. That gender is something that's innate, you're born that way, and gay and lesbian, maybe not so much. Fast forward.
Yeah, what year are we?
That's 1992.
Okay. I think it's important.
That's right, to context. That's right, put it in context.
Yeah.
Fast forward, you began to evolve and grow. You start sitting down and getting to know people who are different than you are, or that your family is, or that you began to evolve, and it challenges your own notions of what is right and what is wrong. And maybe you conclude there is no right or wrong here. This is just life, and we're evolving as a human species, kind of. Even I've had to do that, and there's so many instances of that in my own life. And so when you begin to have conversations in the context of the classroom with students, you see the growth. That's the beauty. That should be the beauty of it. Instead, what I'm seeing more and more, David, is they're actually retarding the growth of the students. You're not encouraged to think. You come in thinking a certain way. Your professors want you to think a certain way. Your institution wants you to think a certain way. But here's the problem. The real problem is then you go to work and you have to confront the reality of, you're not protected in this bubble. You've got to live and work next to people who don't look like you. And frankly, that's a challenge. It's something that people talk about a lot when they talk about black colleges. I don't question the relevancy of HBCUs. I think that's a dumb argument. It's a dumb question. There is a fair question that is posed if you have gone to a black elementary school, middle school, grew up in a black community, and then you went to a black college. The first meaningful interaction that you've had with people who are not black is in the workplace. You're going to be at a disadvantage, just practically speaking. And so it has some downside. Tons of upside, by the way. Being a majority and a minority community, black colleges give you a very special and nurturing environment to grow in. But there's a cost to that.
Yeah, is that just the natural evolution of the way humans are, that if you have a legit grievance, you may need a different place. Or for Thurgood Marshall, who did not get accepted to Maryland Law School, so he needed a place to go to, completely legit in that time and place. But that eventually, if equality works, because the arc does bend towards justice, that eventually you slowly need these things less. It doesn't mean that there's no use for them, but a lot of people are sort of addicted to that original pain or instance or whatever you want to call it.
You nailed it. I mean, that none of us. It's addictive. I mean, that's the problem. And weaning yourself off of that is difficult. And that's not limited to Black people or any group of people. It's just that you get used to it.
Yeah.
And this notion that we were to create, remember, even the concept of affirmative action was supposed to be remedial. Mm-hmm. It was not supposed to go on forever, yeah. Right? But what happens is if you get used to it, and it's a benefit that inures to you and people who look like you, it's really tough to one day say, okay, that's done. I have a 7-year-old daughter, and there's a point at which she's gonna come off of daddy's credit card, and she's gonna fight me.
Yeah.
If it's 18, if it's 28, if it's 38, the day that I decide you now have to leave the nest and figure this out yourself.
If it's 38, can I move in with you? I mean, come on now,
exactly,
what are we talking
right?
about here?
But you're right, you're onto something. That's it's even, think about just in real life. That's the thing that I'm intrigued by is I could not wait until I turned 18. So that I could leave my nest, my mama and my daddy's house, and go and start creating my own. And I'm seeing some of it for economic reasons, but just everyone's sort of staying at home, and it's a very different world that we live in right now, and I'm intrigued by it.
Yeah, how much of this also is about the family in general? That's one of the things when I've had a couple, particularly in this case, when I've had Black conservatives on,
yes.
Like Larry Elder talking about the Black family. You just mentioned your mom and your dad, so
right.
I suspect they're still married.
No, actually,
they're not now. Okay, so that's interesting, but they were for obviously
yes,
most of your
that's right.
childhood.
That's right.
How much of that structure is related to all of this? Why then you can't necessarily deal with outside influences or any of that stuff?
So I struggle with that. I struggle with that because of the realities of slavery. The Black community was always largely maternally run. Mm-hmm. Dad and mom were separated. The family unit in the traditional sense didn't exist. So, and we were successful in spite of that.
Yeah.
So I'm not so sure that I think the value of having mom and dad in the home and frankly at some point grandparents in the home to build that I think it's incredibly important. But I'm not prepared to say that's why everything is wrong. As I pointed out, my parents ultimately were divorced, and I have two sisters. We both went to college, all three of us rather, were successful, have great lives. Nobody's been to jail, no one has 8 kids, So I don't know that I'm prepared to say that it's totally about sort of the family unit. I think family, the one thing that I'm happy to see now, is family is being more broadly defined. Mm-hmm. We in our community oftentimes talk about it takes a village. And the family could be the little old lady across the street. If you don't know your grandmother, she might essentially become your grandma. Mm-hmm. In loco parentis, the concept in Latin that there are a whole bunch of folks who act as parents to make it all happen. So I think we have to be a little too careful. When I hear the strict conservatives, well, it's all of this is because the family model has degraded. I said, well, historically, I'm not so sure we as a people in particular ever had that. That's not real.
Yeah, I was mentioning to you before also that I just went to George Washington's estate, and
yes.
You can go to the slave quarters and they do a daily memorial and all that, and they talk about the men living here,
That's
the women
right.
living here. They sometimes only got to interact for minutes in a day and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, so sometimes when we have to help people revisit history, mm-hmm. Sometimes they're like, oh, it was great back in the day. I said, no, not exactly.
Speaking of history, I wasn't planning on going here, but as long as we're talking about this,
Please.
What do you make of all the monument stuff happening right now? Because I just read one this week that at Christ Church I think it's in
yes.
Alexandria, they're
yes.
taking down the monument, I think it's just a plaque actually.
Right.
And I guess there was also a plaque to Robert E. Lee that upset some people, so they said, all right, we're going to take down George Washington's as well. George Washington, there's no doubt, he did own slaves. He freed as many as he legally could when he died. Not all of them were, because some of them were technically, I think, owned by Martha or her family or something like that. But as I said, they do a great memorial to them. These people were all complex people who were writing laws to free people while they owned people. I mean, it's a whole freaking thing. But me personally, you want my answer first?
Yeah, please, because I'm glad to. But tell me, what do you think?
I don't think you can take these things down. I think you can put a counter monument next to them or a plaque that explains more, maybe you could convince me that they can all be moved to a museum, where then you were going to learn about the history. But I'm very leery that there's just no ending here. That we're going to take down the Robert E. Lee stuff, we're going to take down, other Confederate stuff, but it will creep to George Washington. It will creep to Thomas Jefferson. I was just at the memorial. The words that man wrote about what freedom is, that's the stuff we should all care about. And I just fear that there's no ending here. I don't know if that's enough of a justification not to take anything down, but that's really where my position is coming from, that it won't end.
Well, not surprisingly, I violently agree with you.
Okay.
I
would have accepted either way.
No, I know, and I would have given it. But frankly, there are a couple of aha moments for me. First of all, we don't like to acknowledge this, but black people owned slaves in America too. That's real. The litmus test is, if you own slaves, somehow we should erase from history or put you into a museum in a little box so that only people who visit museums will learn about you.
Right. That's why I don't really like that answer. I throw it up there because in a Q&A that I did at Claremont McKenna, a kid asked me and I said that. And he said, well, what if we put him in minds? I said, all right, we can play with that one a little bit.
But to your point, if you take this to its, I think, illogical end, we then go through and parse every person's history and we find the one thing they did that we didn't like, which, by the way, at that time, at that point in the world, may have been totally the norm.
Yep.
I'm not arguing it was good or bad. I'm just saying it was the way people lived and it was what was the moray, the folkway, whatever of the time. I struggle with this. I think you put everything into context. When I ride through and I see a Confederate statue, I was laughing, I was in Old Town Alexandria the other day.
Yeah.
I have passed this particular, this
Which one is it? I was just there.
It's Robert E. Lee. It's the one that's sitting right in, it's just past, I don't know the street, past King Street, I think it is. There's a statue of this guy on a horse. I've passed it a number of times and thought, that's interesting. I live in Washington, D.C. on Capitol Hill, and there are all sorts of these statues that, frankly, Charles Barkley, who I don't quote very often, put it best.
Come on, do a Barkley impression. I want to see a Barkley impression.
I can't quite put it down, but he said something which was really provocative. He said, frankly, most African American people aren't thinking about that damn monument. I mean, it's just, we have real issues facing our community. And the idea that we have now gotten preoccupied with these monuments is bizarre to me, and frankly, and more disturbing to me, is that it's divisive.
Yeah.
Anytime you start peeling apart people's history, all of this is sort of the history of the country, the good and the bad. And I think that's the beauty of telling the story. And when I talk to students about it, because I've had this conversation with some of our students, and I said, do you think, all of us, if we go back into our history, you're going to find out that your grandparents weren't perfect people. The grandfather who beat on your grandmother, who cheated on your grandmother, the grandmother who, let's say back in the day decided not to have a kid, had a kid out of wedlock and decided to give him to an aunt and never acknowledged that that kid was hers. There's so many things.
And we've all got this shit in our families, right?
Everybody's got this shit in their lives, right? And the notion that somehow you've literally made this person's life less important because of a decision that happened. I mean, all of us are growing on this journey called life. And I just think we've gotten too serious about it. And it's also, frankly, divided the country, a country that is way too divided right now. I mean, I think of Martin Luther King, Lincoln, Thurgood Marshall, they have to be like sitting back somewhere looking at this saying, oh my God, I can't believe once we pulled the rules down, changed the laws, became a more open and free society, none of us could have thunk that this is where we'd end up.
Yeah.
And the easy answer is to blame it on Trump. But the fact of the matter is this started way before. This has nothing.
I know. Somehow everyone blames everything on Trump now, but I'm pretty sure even the NFL protests were going on under Obama.
Of course they
were. And when you talk about the historical stuff, Obama, his first 4 years was against gay marriage.
Right.
So should we look now 20 years and go, we got to take Obama's statue or take his library down or...
Oh, don't even start me on that. I mean, there are so
I'll start you on that.
So many countless examples. I was talking to folks at, there was a big discussion about public schools and, we need to send all of our kids to public schools. And it's like, time out. The Obama girls, where did they go to school? Sidwell.
I know, it's not very fancy.
Good for them.
Yeah.
But then you can't turn around and say, public schools are wonderful, they're great for everyone, but no, the reality is they're good enough for your children. those are some of the moments when we have to stop and just pause and say, you know, it's gotten crazy. That's the point. I mean, I'm so frustrated with it right now because we're picking apart people's lives. And the reality is none of us would want someone to do the same thing on an individual level with me. You want to pick my life apart, you can come out and say I'm a horrible person. Ignore the fact that I have a beautiful 7-year-old daughter, that my parents are wonderful, that I'm a good son, but you want to focus on the 1 or 2 decisions that perhaps I would have made, and frankly, I would have done them differently if I were 48. But I'm not. I was 18. Right? So it's we're just in an interesting spot. And I know that's what you're talking about, but it disturbs me. It disturbs me in some very significant ways that I'm raising a child in this world, in this country in particular, that's not the country I envisioned it would be.
Yeah. Do you think there's any chance that it actually is the country, but it's just the level of noise has gotten so out of control? So when we think about, you know, I talk a lot about social media and how Twitter is affecting everybody and the way we all cater news to ourselves and all that stuff. But then I took all of August offline. I shut down, I was working on my book, I disappeared for a while. And when I spent more time I mean, I talk to people for a living, but outside of this room, just talking to random people, I think most people do buy everything that you just said there. And I don't think that people are necessarily as hysterical as maybe we feel they are. Do you think that's possible? Or is that I'm just trying to give a real silver lining to this thing?
I think you're trying to feel better because as much as we can't just put the media over in a little box. Particularly, it used to be traditional media, but now it's social media. And so when you add all of that, it really does influence the narrative. It influences what people think it means to live in America. And I do think we're in a very different place now. You're right. Every person in the world doesn't know what's going on. Manafort gets charged today. The vast majority of Americans don't know or care. It's people who watch the news and who read and who think about this, and you know, where it matters. The vast majority of Americans are like, I'm trying to keep the lights on, I want to put my kid in school, and I want a decent life and retire with some decent savings in the bank. That's more practical. So I think you're right, but the influencers, people like me and you, maybe not like the two of us, because the reality is, the more liberal media has just put it out there so far progressively. They're really crafting the narrative and the message, and it's something that we have to pause.
Do you find yourself with the political home? Because obviously I'm in a lockstep with so many of the things that you're talking about. When I heard you give that speech, I was like, yeah. Well, I mean, 20 times I was like, okay, do you consider yourself? Are you in a party?
Totally independent. So, or as when I was in North Carolina, it was called unaffiliated. That was the phrase. You weren't an independent because there were independents. That was yet a third party. So it's unaffiliated. I was a Democrat for years, and actually, quite as it's kept, was a big part of Hillary Clinton's 2008 campaign. Raised a ton of money, had her in my home, fundraisers, had Erskine Bowles and his wife. I mean, I was like really, really into that world.
I did not see that in the research.
Yeah. So literally hosted her in my home in North Carolina and did a lot. And then fast forward, I've become, this last election, frankly, less enamored. So I was not involved in that campaign. I also wasn't involved in Donald Trump's campaign. I just have decided that I'm going to have to figure out where I fit. And right now, it's just, I'd like to say I'm an American. I'm a patriot. I'm trying to figure out, on balance, which individual is looking out for the best interest of America. And that's it's a lonely place sometimes because, you know, we're in this you're either a Democrat or you're Republican. And some call themselves independents, but the reality is they lean left or right. I'm sort of in the middle. There are things that I think I would take, positions that I take that are more conservatively aligned, and then there are times when it's more less conservatively or more liberally aligned. But I don't think you can just fall into a box. I really don't. I think that's the problem. Frankly, there's some issues that I really take a strong position on. I mean, we were just, just the other day, we'll talk about something. I was at the Advancing Justice Seminar. It's Advancing Justice Summit, which is hosted by the Charles Koch Foundation. A big discussion around reducing the number of incarcerated Americans. And so someone threw out, by 2020, we want to reduce the number of people incarcerated by 50%. And I paused and I said, well, that's dumb. Suppose 30% of those people really should be incarcerated.
Yeah.
Suppose they're not, they absolutely cannot be put back on the streets.
You're telling me you're thinking through, just someone yells out a phrase and you're thinking it through?
And I'm thinking it through because...
Lordy, you
and
get invited to these
Well, I'll
things?
tell you why, because it bothered me. Because here's the deal. I grew up in one of those fragile communities. I grew up, and I shared this with the group. I said, I grew up in the area, and my grandmother, I'll never forget this. I'll never forget, riding up to high school, people would run up to our windows. She, 60-plus-year-old grandmother, and me in an ROTC uniform, going to high school. Drug dealers would run up to our windows. Prostitutes are standing on the corner in morning. This is 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning next to a school.
Man.
Okay? But this was the community. My grandmother one day, I'll never forget it. She said, they wouldn't allow this in Whitetown. They would never put up with this in Whitetown. She was so bothered. So she became committed. She called, demanded police. She demanded that you remove these people from our community. And so fast forward, you just want to release them all back to our community? And I said this to one of the attendees. I said, here's the problem. That sounds great. And it's great for you because they're not coming back to your community. That's why this isn't your problem. If you release 50% of these people, where do you think they're coming? They're not coming to suburbia. They're going to show back up in the communities and continue terrorizing and negatively impacting the community. So on that front, I tell that story to say, listen, I am passionate about it and I am bothered. I appreciate well-intended people thinking that just releasing half the people who are currently incarcerated into our communities is a good thing, but they don't think about the impact of that. When my kid can't go out and play in the streets for being shot. My daughter has to walk past these scantily clad women who are selling themselves, and she begins to think that's normal. Yeah. That's not the world. And you may call that a nonviolent offender, but it's not nonviolent. It's actually more violent because it's working into the psyche of these young people.
There's so much there, because you could also look at that and go, well, a certain amount of those people are in there for drug offenses, not selling.
Right.
And if they had better representation or more money, they would have never been in jail in the first place.
Or better parents. So you can't just blame the government. See, that's the thing. Fast forward, we want to get to 20 and blame the system for not giving them good lawyers and the system for incarcerating them too long and all of that. And you forget that a lot of that stuff started a lot earlier in their lives.
Now you took it back to the scary conservative point.
That's right. It's not that scary because, by the way, my only point is it doesn't have to be mom or dad. It has to be someone. It could be a school teacher that helped infuse morals and the sense of right and wrong into that kid. But we've got to go back. We can't just wake up and say, okay, now you've got a 19-year-old who has a long criminal history, no regard for anyone or anything, and say, we just think he or she should not be incarcerated. Okay. Then pray tell, what are you going to do about that?
Yeah. You ever get an answer to that? I mean,
No.
if you let these people out, I get that. I'm fully with you. Okay, came from a bad place, didn't have the proper support, potentially in jail for doing drugs, not even selling them. So the idea is, okay, you want to get this person out of jail, even if it's just an economic thing. You don't want to have the system spending money on them.
Right.
But now you put them out there, you still have some responsibility, I think, that the system, or whatever you want to call it, has some responsibility to make sure that now you just don't toss this back into the mix of what got them there in the first place.
Well, right. And how do you fix that? That is the big question. I mean, the easy answer is release them. And then what? I would say, and then what? And the thing that bothers me is that many of the people who advocate for this release don't have to answer the question what, because they live in neighborhoods with gated neighborhoods with a lot of police protection, et cetera. So they're not impacted by it. They just want to, once you get them out, and we see this, listen, and unfortunately with individuals who suffer with mental illness. So you want them out, and then what? What are you going to do now? And that's someone else's problem. And the system, as you call it, the non-system, hasn't answered that question.